the metallic clang of the gymnasium. Doors echoed through the vast empty space, breaking the eerie silence harsh. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Elena blinked awake, disoriented and cold. The first thing she felt was the coarse rope digging into her wrists, tied tightly behind her back. Her legs were similarly bound, her ankles tethered to the base of a pole in the center of the room. Glitter clung to her skin, shimmering mockingly on under the harsh lights. Laughter rang out. Look who finally decided to wake up. Marcy's voice was shrill with amusement, her face twisted into a smug grin as she leaned casually against the bleachers behind her. Jake and a few others snickered, their phones held up recording every humiliating moment. What the hell? Elena's voice cracked as she tugged against the restraints. Panic surged in her chest, but she bit it down, refusing to show fear. Here, untie me. Don't be such a buzzle, Jake taunted, dumping another handful of glitter over her head. It caught in her dark hair, sparkling like a cruel halo. You always act so high and mighty. Consider this a reality check. The group erupted into laughter, again the sound sharp and merciless. Marcy crouched in front of Elena, her smile sickly sweet. You've been acting like you're better than everyone lately, ignoring us, walking around like you're some kind of royalty. Well, guess what? You're not. Elena glared up at her, fire blazing in her eyes. Despite her vulnerable position, so this is what you do when someone doesn't play your games, tie them up and humiliate them. Pathetic. Marcy's grin faltered for a split second before she recovered, standing abruptly. Keep talking, princess. Maybe we'll post this online, let everyone see the real you. Elena's heart sank at the mention of social media. She could already imagine the captions. Little Miss Perfect isn't so perfect now. The thought of becoming a viral laughing stock made her stomach churn, but she refused to let them see her break you. Think this makes you powerful? She said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. It doesn't. It makes you cowards. Jake stepped forward, his face darkening. Say that again. Enough, Marcy. Cut off her tone sharper. Now Latoon rap this up. We've made our point. But as they prepared to leave, the gym doors swung open with a bang. Elena, a deep, commanding voice rang out, freezing everyone in their tracks. The group turned in unison, their smug expressions replaced with wide-eyed fear. Standing in the doorway was a man in a tailored suit, his presence exuding authority and power. Behind him, 2 security guards flanked his sides, their stern faces promising swift consequences. Dad. Elena's voice was small, a mix of relief and disbelief. Though man Alexander Grayson strode forward, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. He took in the ropes, the glitter, the mocking faces of the so-called friends, and his jaw tightened with barely contained fury. Untie her. Now his voice was cold and deadly, words slicing through the air like a blade. Marcy stammered, backing away. We were just now. Jake scrambled to comply, fumbling with the knots as the others stood frozen in shock. As soon as Elena was free, Alexander stepped forward, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Are you okay? He asked, his voice softening just for her. She nodded, though tears pricked at her eyes. Alexander straightened, turning back to the group. The softness vanished, replaced by an icy rage that sent shivers down their spines. You have no idea who you just messed with, he said, his voice low but filled with menace. The gym seemed to shrink under the weight of his words. Security will escort you out, he continued, motioning to the guards, and believe me when I say you will regret this. I'll make sure of it. The group was herded out, their protests and excuses falling on deaf ears. Marcy looked back once, her face pale and terrified, before disappearing through the doors. Elena sat there for a moment, her hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. Alexander knelt beside her, his expression softening again. Let's get you home, she nodded, silently leaning on him as they left the gym, but deep down she knew this wasn't over. And neither did they. The news of what happened in the gymnasium spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire school was buzzing. Some were horrified, others curious, and a few those who'd never liked Elena were disappointed they hadn't been there to witness it themselves. Marcy and her friends didn't show up to school. Rumors swirled about expulsions, lawsuits, and the wrath of Alexander Grayson, the man who wasn't just Elena's father, but one of the most powerful business tycoons in the city. Elena, however, didn't bask in the chaos. She kept her head down, determined to move forward, but the stares and whispers followed her everywhere. Did you hear her? Dad owns like half the companies in the state. No wonder Marcy's crew is screwed. I mean, what were they thinking? You don't mess with someone like her. Elena ignored them all, focusing on getting through her classes, but by lunch she couldn't take it anymore. Retreating to the library, she sank into a corner chair, hoping for some peace. Hey! She looked up to see Caleb, a quiet boy from her English class. He wasn't someone she'd ever spoken to much, but his easygoing nature made him popular in his own way. What do you want? She asked, her tone sharper than intended. He held up his hands. Relax, I'm not here to gawk, just thought you could use some company. Elena hesitated, but eventually nodded. Caleb sat across from her, placing his tray on the table, so he began. You're basically a superhero now? She frowned. What, you know, rich dad swooping in, saving the day, this kind of epic. Elena couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. It didn't feel epic, Caleb smiled, but his expression grew serious. What they did was messed up. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around. Thanks, she said quietly, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Meanwhile, Marcy's world was crumbling. Her parents had been furious when the school called, detailing the incident and the potential legal consequences. Alexander Grayson had pulled no punches, threatening to press charges unless she and her friends faced strict disciplinary action. Jake had already cracked, spilling everything to his parents in a desperate attempt to shift the blame. Marcy, however, was left to grapple with the fallout. She sat in her room, staring at her phone messages, flooded in, some from people condemning her, others from fake friends trying to distance themselves. How did it come to this, she wondered, tears streaming down her face. For years, she'd been the queen, be the one everyone wanted to be or be friends with, but now all of that felt hollow. And then there was Elena, the girl she tormented out of jealousy and insecurity, who had faced her humiliation with more grace and strength than Marcy could ever muster. Marcy hated herself for what she'd done, but she didn't know how to make it right. The days passed and things began to shift. Elena, tired of the constant whispers and stares, decided to take control of the narrative. During school assembly, she stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. No, everyone here has heard what happened, she began, her voice steady, and I'm not here to relive it, but I want to say this: what Marcy and her friends did wasn't just about me. It was about a culture that lets people think it's okay to tear others down to feel powerful. The room was silent, every eye on her. I'm not perfect, she continued, but no one deserves to be humiliated like that. And if you've ever felt like you had to stay silent while someone else was being bullied, I'm telling you now, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to say no. Her words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding. Marcy, sitting in the back of the auditorium, felt a lump in her throat. For the first time in a long time, she saw Elena not as a rival, but as someone she wanted to be. The story of the gymnasium became a turning point for everyone involved. Elena found her voice, using her experience to advocate for change, while Marcy began a painful but necessary journey of self-reflection and redemption. By the end of the school year, the scars remained, but so did the lessons. For Elena, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, turning her pain into power. And for Marcy, it was about proving that even the worst mistakes could lead to something better. Because in the end, it wasn't just about what happened, it was about what came next. As the summer break approached, Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had happened: the chaos, the humiliation, the sudden attention. It all felt surreal, but through it all, something inside her had shifted. She was no longer the quiet girl who let the world pass her by, no longer the girl who hid in the shadows, afraid of the spotlight. When she looked into the mirror now, she saw someone different. Stronger, more confident. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The months of media attention had made her something of a local figure. Invitations to speak at youth groups, anti-bullying campaigns, and even charity events flooded in. At first, Elena had been hesitant. The idea of standing in front of large crowds terrified her, but her father Alexander was always there, offering quiet encouragement and reminding her that the world needed to hear her story. One evening, as they sat together in the large living room of their home, Elena spoke her mind. Dad, I never asked for any of this. The spotlight, the attention. I just wanted to survive, to finish high school and go on with my life. But now I feel like I have to do something bigger with all this. It feels like a chance to change things, but I don't know how. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes full of pride. You already are changing things, Elena, by being yourself, by standing up when everyone else was sitting down. You've given hope to others who might have felt helpless, but this is your story now. You write the next chapter. His words lingered with her as she continued her work with the anti-bullying campaign, finding herself more and more involved in organizing workshops and speaking out. Each event gave her a sense of purpose, of empowerment. Every speech she gave was an act of defiance against the girl who once felt invisible, helpless, and weak. But with every step forward, there was always a shadow from the past lurking just beneath the surface. Across town, Marcy sat in the dim light of her bedroom, a photo album open in front of her. She ran her fingers over the images of her and her friends smiling in happier times before the fallout. Her parents had gone quiet after the incident, their faces etched with disappointment. They hadn't scolded her as harshly as some might expect, but their silence had cut deeper than any harsh words could. Her life, once filled with social events and constant attention, had come to a standstill. She couldn't even bear to look at her friends anymore, the ones who had once been her closest allies. Jake had tried to reach out, apologizing profusely, but Marcy had shut him down. Her shame was too great. She couldn't face the people who had participated in tearing down someone like Elena. And then there was the deep gnawing regret she knew she had been cruel, but it wasn't until the whole school had turned its eyes on her until the weight of her actions had been made so public that she realized the full extent of the damage she'd caused. She had hurt Elena, but more than that, she had hurt herself. Marcy's identity had always been wrapped up in her social standing, her ability to manipulate others into giving her power. But now, that power was gone. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. "Marcy, there's someone here to see you." Marcy's heart skipped a beat she wasn't expecting. Anyone, she stood hesitantly as the door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Elena. Marcy blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. What are you doing here?" Elena took a step inside, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk. I know you probably didn't expect that." Marcy stood frozen for a moment, then motioned for Elena to sit. "I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me." Elena sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving Marcy's. "I don't know if I forgive you yet, but I've been thinking, and I realized that what happened, what you did, it wasn't just about me, it was about something bigger, something that needed to be addressed. Maybe it's time we both faced it." Marcy swallowed hard. "I can't even begin to apologize enough. I can't change what I did, and I don't even deserve forgiveness. I've been so selfish." Elena leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening. "You hurt me, Marcy, but you also hurt yourself. I think you know that you lost something that was part of your identity, something that made you feel powerful, but you can rebuild yourself just like I did. I don't expect us to be friends, but I think it's important you understand that there's always a chance for change." Marcy's eyes welled with tears. "I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I'll try. I'll start with myself." Elena nodded, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "That's all anyone can do." As Elena stood to leave, Marcy called after her, "Wait." Elena paused, looking back. "You're stronger than the time I ever was." "I hope you know that." Elena smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that radiated from the inside. "I think I could do." By the end of the summer, the dynamics had shifted. Elena continued to speak out, her presence at school events a beacon for students who had felt voiceless. Her speeches, now filled with more personal reflection and calls for unity, resonated with everyone who had felt the sting of cruelty. Marcy, on the other hand, took a quieter approach to her redemption. She didn't seek out the spotlight. Instead, she focused on self-reflection, confronting her past actions and slowly rebuilding the trust of those she had hurt. Her relationship with Elena remained distant, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer enemies, but for Elena, this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about getting revenge or seeing those who wronged her punished. It was about healing, growth, and using her voice to create change. She had been knocked down, humiliated, and broken, but now she was something else, stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever the future held with the same resilience that had carried her through the worst moments of her life. In the end, the greatest lesson was clear. Sometimes the deepest pain leads to the greatest transformation, and for both Elena and Marcy, it was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives.